Spartan warriors ran. Roman legionnaires marched. Most warrior cultures built their cardiovascular systems through movement. Viking warriors built theirs by standing still in the cold, and they carried less body fat than almost any fighting class in recorded history. So what did three civilizations separated by thousands of miles independently discover about cold, fat, and the human body that your gym's cardio section hasn't taught you? You are about to find out. Here is what modern fitness sold you. Fat loss is a cardio problem. Run more, row more, get your heart rate into the zone, and hold it there. The supplement industry added a second belief on top of that one, that fat burning is a chemistry problem solvable with thermogenics, stimulants, and metabolic accelerators. Between those two beliefs, men have been spending hours on machines and money on products, and their body composition in their 40s still doesn't look the way they expected. There is a reason for that, and the reason is not effort. It is a mechanism. The human body has two distinct fat-burning systems. The first is the one modern fitness programs address, the aerobic system, the caloric deficit engine, the one your cardio sessions activate. The second is largely ignored by modern programs, and was the primary fat regulation system of every warrior culture that lived through extreme cold. It requires no movement. It requires no products. It requires specific thermal exposure, delivered in a specific way, to a specific depth. Three civilizations discovered this independently. None of them were looking for a fat loss protocol. They were trying to survive. Culture 1, the Norse warrior tradition, Scandinavia, 8th to 11th century CE. The Viking raider who landed on the coast of Lindisfarne in 793 CE was not carrying excess body fat. We know this not from imagination, but from skeletal analysis and the written records of those who encountered Norse warriors in battle. Accounts that describe a fighting class lean enough to move with speed in water, dense enough to sustain cold water exposure that would incapacitate modern men within minutes. The Norse did not train for fat loss. They trained for raiding, rowing, and winter survival. But those demands produced a specific physical outcome that modern researchers recognize immediately: exceptionally high activation of what is now called brown adipose tissue. Brown adipose tissue is not the fat you are trying to lose. It is the fat your body uses to generate heat. It contains a protein called uncoupling protein 1, thermogenin, that burns stored white fat as fuel to keep core temperature stable in cold environments. Every human body contains brown fat deposits. The difference between a modern man and a Viking warrior is not genetics. It is activation. Norse warriors activated their brown fat constantly and involuntarily. The fjord water they rode through never exceeded 10 degrees Celsius in winter months. Their longhouses used fire for warmth, but the sleeping environment was cold. The clothing of the raiding season was functional but not insulated by modern standards. Cold was not a challenge they overcame. It was a condition they inhabited. Researchers studying cold-induced thermogenesis have found that sustained cold exposure, not shock, not brief ice immersion, but prolonged mild to moderate cold, increases brown fat metabolic activity by between 15 and 25% in healthy men. That metabolic increase does not stop when the cold exposure stops. It persists for hours. The Norse warrior sleeping in a cold longhouse was burning stored fat while he slept. Modern cardio burns calories during the session and stops. Norse cold exposure burned fat during exposure and kept burning after it ended. Culture 2, the Tibetan tummo practitioners, Himalayas, 11th century CE, onward. On the other side of the world, at altitudes above 4,000 meters in the Himalayan plateau, a tradition of heat generation through deliberate cold exposure was being refined in monastery communities with no contact with Norse civilization whatsoever. The practice was called tummo, inner fire, and it was documented in the 11th century CE by the Tibetan teacher Milarepa, though the physiological techniques it describes are considerably older. Tummo practitioners are famous for a specific demonstration: wet cloth placed on the body in freezing temperatures, dried by the practitioner's internally generated heat. This is not a performance trick. It is a documented physiological response studied by Dr. Herbert Benson of Harvard Medical School in the 1980s, who measured skin temperature increases of up to 8.3 degrees Celsius in tummo practitioners during cold exposure. a thermal output that burns significant caloric energy from stored fat. What the Tibetan tradition understood, expressed in its own language, is now understood in biomedical terms. Deliberate, controlled breathing combined with cold exposure produces a measurable cascade. Norepinephrine release, brown fat activation, core temperature stabilization through fat combustion. The specific breathing pattern used in tummo, extended exhalation, breath retention, and controlled hyperventilation phases, elevates norepinephrine levels in a way that sustained cardio exercise does not. Norepinephrine is the primary trigger for brown fat activation. It is also the hormone that directly signals fat cells to release stored lipids for fuel. Your morning run produces a moderate norepinephrine response. A properly executed cold exposure protocol with controlled breathing produces a response that outperforms it. The monks who practiced tummo were not doing this for body composition. They were building the capacity to meditate in freezing conditions without dying. But the men who did this daily for decades were consistently described by outside observers as lean, physically resilient, and functionally capable well into ages at which modern men are managing chronic inflammation and joint pain. The mechanism was the same as what the Norse discovered through environment. The application was different. The result was identical. Culture 3. The Ainu people of Hokkaido, northern Japan, documented from the 17th century CE. The Ainu are the indigenous people of Hokkaido, the northernmost island of Japan, living in one of the coldest inhabited environments in East Asia. Early Japanese and later Dutch records from the 17th century describe Ainu hunters and warriors who remained lightly clothed in temperatures that required visitors from southern climates to wear heavy layers. Not because they were performing hardship, because their cold adaptation was physiological. Their bodies had been trained by a lifetime of cold exposure to generate and regulate heat differently from cold, naive populations. What makes the Ainu particularly relevant to this conversation is the documentation of their body composition. Early anthropological records consistently describe Ainu men as muscular and lean, despite a diet that varied significantly by season and did not feature the high-protein optimization that modern fitness culture insists is necessary for maintaining muscle mass. What they had in abundance was cold exposure. Year-round, unavoidable, structural. Modern research into cold-adapted populations has confirmed what those early observations suggested. Cold-exposed populations show elevated resting metabolic rate, the rate at which the body burns calories at rest, independent of activity. This elevation is not marginal. Studies comparing cold-adapted populations to thermoneutral environment controls show resting metabolic rate differences of 10 to 15%. Over weeks, months, and years, that difference in resting fat combustion is the difference between a body that gradually accumulates fat and a body that does not. The Ainu were not trying to stay lean. They were hunting, building, and surviving. But the cold they lived in was doing metabolic work on their bodies that no amount of cardio can replicate, because cardio raises metabolism during exercise and returns it to baseline. Cold adaptation raises the baseline itself. 3 civilizations, 3 continents, 3 independent paths to the same physiological outcome: brown fat activation, elevated resting metabolic rate, and year-round fat combustion without a single hour of dedicated cardio. The modern cold method. You do not have to row through a fjord or sleep in a Himalayan monastery. The thermal demands that activated brown fat in Norse warriors and Tibetan monks are available to you in a modern context. What matters is the mechanism, not the mythology. Here is how to apply all 3 principles. Principle 1. Sustained mild cold, from the Norse tradition. The Norse result did not come from brief extreme cold. It came from prolonged, moderate cold that the body had to metabolically manage over time. Your modern application is not an ice bath. It is environmental recalibration. Lower your sleeping environment to between 16 and 19 degrees Celsius, roughly 60 to 66 degrees Fahrenheit. This is the range in which brown fat activation during sleep is measurable and sustained. A 2014 study published in Diabetes found that men sleeping at 19 degrees Celsius for 4 weeks doubled their brown fat volume and showed a corresponding increase in insulin sensitivity. Do this for 4 weeks before adding any other cold intervention. The baseline has to shift first. Principle 2. Breathing combined with cold, from the tummo tradition. The Tibetan contribution is the specific breathing protocol that amplifies the norepinephrine response to cold exposure. You will do this before your morning shower, before full cold exposure begins. 30 deep breaths. Inhale fully through the nose, exhale through the mouth without forcing the last air out. On the 30th exhale, hold the breath out for as long as you comfortably can. Inhale fully and hold for 15 seconds. Repeat 3 rounds. This protocol elevates norepinephrine before cold contact. When you then step into a cold shower, water between 10 and 15 degrees Celsius, for 2 to 3 minutes, your brown fat activation response is significantly amplified compared to cold exposure without the breathing preparation. You are not just tolerating cold, you are priming your body to burn fat in response to it. Do this 3 to 5 mornings per week, not daily at first. Allow 48 hours of recovery between full sessions in the first 2 weeks. Principle 3. Progressive cold adaptation, from the Ainu tradition. The Ainu result came from year-round, unavoidable cold exposure that built genuine physiological adaptation over time. The modern application is progressive reduction of your thermal comfort zone, not through discomfort for its own sake, but through the deliberate removal of thermoneutral convenience. 2 practical applications. First, reduce your reliance on indoor heating during waking hours in the colder months. A room at 18 degrees Celsius rather than 23 is not uncomfortable for an adapted body. It is simply colder than what you have been protecting yourself from. Second, end every workout with 5 minutes of reduced core temperature. Step outside in lighter clothing. Lower the post-exercise environment. Allow the post-training body to cool actively, rather than rewarming immediately. This matters because post-exercise is the window in which your body's brown fat sensitivity is highest. Rewarming immediately with a hot shower or a heated room closes that window. Staying cool extends it. Combine all 3 principles across a 12-week block. Cool sleeping environment from week 1. Breathing protocol plus cold morning exposure from week 2. Post-workout cold extension from week 4 onward. By week 12, you are running all 3 mechanisms simultaneously. Resting metabolic rate elevated, norepinephrine response amplified, brown fat volume increased. That is what the Norse warrior, the Tibetan monk, and the Ainu hunter were each doing through the demands of their lives. Not one of them was on a treadmill. 3 civilizations with no knowledge of each other independently discovered that the human body has a fat-burning system that cardio doesn't reach. The Norse found it in their fjords. The Tibetan monks found it in the Himalayas. The Ainu found it in the winters of Hokkaido. They didn't find it by adding more effort. They found it by removing thermal comfort. Your body already has the mechanism. Brown fat, thermogenin, the uncoupling protein that burns stored fat to generate heat. It is waiting for the signal that modern life has stopped sending. Intensity built them. Precision kept them. The cold was the precision. Start with your sleeping environment tonight. The protocol is already available to you. The only thing that has changed is that you now know what it does.